Well, good morning, or I guess I should say afternoon, unless you're out on the West Coast or one of those other time zones. I am Kevin Bakewell. I am pleased to welcome you to Tampa, Kansas City Day here at Freelance Business Week. I am a freelance practitioner here in the Tampa Bay area, sort of a newbie to that crowd, actually, having started my own business just a couple of years ago, Bakewell Public Relations. And this has been a wonderful resource for me, and that's why I got involved in it. So I hope that you all find that it's just as valuable to you today. I'm going to bring on screen my first presenter of the day, my good friend, Kristen Corprian. Good morning, good afternoon, Kristen.
Good afternoon.
This time zone thing, especially when we have a program at high noon, has just kind of got me confused. But anyway, we're so glad to have you here with us today. Actually, a repeat from last year, which was my first year being involved in Freelance Business Week, and we had so many wonderful comments on your presentation. So we're doing a repeat of that this year, and just really excited to have you with us today. With that, I am going to not waste too much time with my comments, and I'm going to pop your presentation up here on screen in just a second. And then just so those of you watching know, we're going to try to address questions as we go. If you have something that's relevant to what Kristen's talking about at that point in time, we'll pop the question up on the screen. She'll see it and you'll see it. And then anything else we'll cover at the very end. So Kristen, there is your presentation, and I'm going to take myself off screen, and away you go.
Thanks so much, Kevin. And huge thank you to everyone on the Freelance Business Week team. This is such an amazing program. I'm delighted to be here again for the second year. My goal today is really to give those folks who registered and who happen to listen to this presentation as much practical advice that they can start applying right away. So our topic for today is avoiding legal landmines, practical tips for freelancers. I know most people don't usually enjoy hearing from lawyers, but I promise we are not all bad. There's good and bad in every industry. A little bit about me. My name is Kristen Corprian. I have been practicing law for over 7 years now. I think we just hit 8. I started practicing at a large law firm representing big companies like Walmart, HBO, and I found, having been raised by entrepreneurs, that I much prefer working with small business owners. I am now a small business owner myself. I very much enjoy working with entrepreneurs and all of the effort and work and excitement that goes into building something. I also happen to teach part-time. I've taught at this point both at the undergraduate and law school levels. I'm a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley School of Law, and I am also, while an attorney, a fairly normal human being. I love my dog. I'm married. I went to University of South Florida undergraduate. That's where my husband and I met. So I'm also a very proud Tampa native, even though I currently live in Miami. So that's a little bit about me. And while I am a lawyer, I am not your lawyer. This is a great opportunity, while I highlight these disclaimers, to point out something that comes along with working with attorneys. Attorneys, no matter which state they're in, so long as they care about these rules, are of course constrained by the rules of their local bar association. The goal of a lot of these rules really is consumer protection. So when you hear a lawyer maybe dodging a question or putting one of these disclaimers up front, we are following our rules and obligations by, at least here, the Florida Bar, to make sure that the consumer isn't confused about receiving specific legal advice. All the things that I'll be talking about today are more general tips to help you use. And it's important that you know lawyers are constrained in this way, because sometimes when lawyers are hedging with their words, which they may be required to do, it may cause you to immediately start to distrust them or put a little strain on the relationship. If I didn't have to start this presentation with a disclaimer, I might not. So I appreciate you not holding it against me. I think it's important for every conversation about business, whether you're a freelancer or you identify more as an entrepreneur, to start with mindset. So that's where we're going to start. And I promise we'll get to the law for those of you who are eager for it. Here, I think that it's important to note that as you're launching a business, and even if you're in a more mature growing business, right, you don't know what you don't know. Most of the business owners that we work with are extremely competent, extremely bright, but they tend to be unsophisticated consumers of legal services. If you wanted to be a lawyer, you would have gone to law school. And so I think it's important that we come to this conversation with the right mindset. And that is, unless you want to become an attorney, be fair to yourself that there's a lot of things you're just not going to know about the law. There is a lot more than I can cover in the hour. I promise I'm going to try to put in as much as I possibly can for this presentation today. But I think the right mindset isn't the collective groan, God, I don't want to hear from a lawyer, or I'm terrified to read this 10-page contract. I think when we're business owners, when we're freelancers, we should come at it from that standpoint of you can learn anything, and you really do need to have a baseline knowledge to ensure that you're not violating any rules or regulations. And the truth is, this stuff is learnable. So I'm coming at this from the standpoint not to scare you, not to offer horror stories, although I have plenty to share, but really from the standpoint of this is something that you can pick up. And as the CEO or as the master freelancer, you should wrap your head around this, and you absolutely can. So that is what we're going to do. You have got this. You've got this again. Okay. Legal tips for freelancers and small business owners. Initial starting place, tip 1 for lawyers, words matter. I think they should matter for everyone, but I'm biased, of course. I think we have to start at a place of, are you a freelancer or are you an entrepreneur, right? Some folks misuse these words, and they misuse them from the standpoint of, I'm a freelancer, so I don't have to worry about the things that a huge corporation should have to worry about. Those things don't apply to me. That's not necessarily true. For your own planning purposes, we want to make sure we're not using words incorrectly, right? Freelancer and startup business, I don't think are the same thing. So we don't want to use those incorrectly. And I think it's important for your own planning purposes to understand if you are maybe a freelancer for now and you eventually want to grow your freelance work that you're probably doing by yourself to a team. So you eventually maybe want to get to the place of being a small business owner. Or do you want to scale rapidly? In which case you'd still be a business owner, but maybe you're going to be part of a startup environment. Here, I understand we're speaking to freelancers, but I've spoken to many of them who aren't really clear on this distinction between, I want to be a freelancer. I know what that means for me. I am exchanging my time for services, still trying to be profitable, and I don't plan to build out the infrastructure that we would usually expect to see with a small business. If that's you, great. But if you're not really sure, or you plan to eventually build out the more traditional business infrastructure, that's going to affect the advice that a lawyer would give you about what you should be planning and budgeting for, and what type of documents might be more important for you than others. So tip 1 is to actually make sure you understand the difference between a freelancer and an entrepreneur. Usually when we're thinking about what an entrepreneur is building, they're building out systems for the firm, perhaps eventually planning to bring on staff, and they're going to invest in growing processes, and others are going to join their team and make money for the business. When we're talking a traditional freelancer, they're exchanging their time, their expertise, their knowledge for money from their clientele. The law applies to both, but as you're building this out, I really want you to make sure that you're clear as you're bringing on service providers like legal, like accounting to help you out. You're clear on your goal as the person driving the ship. And if you're not really sure which one you are, it's maybe helpful to take yourself out of the equation and ask, does your business still work if you're not there? If the answer is yes, we're looking more at entrepreneurship. You're building the types of systems that'll work and make you money while you're asleep. They're going to work one way or the other, with or without you. You're not carrying the business on your back. I mean, plenty of entrepreneurs might believe that they are, but they're trying to get away from that. A freelancer, the business is not going to work without you. You're the one on production line producing whatever the delivery is, the service, the product, it's all on you, and you don't really intend to bring anyone else on your team. So one way or the other, the law still applies, but I want to make sure, and if we were in a live audience situation, I would certainly poll the audience and get a sense of which of you are freelancers, which of you are entrepreneurs, and who of you know you want to be freelancers in the long term, and who of you are maybe planning for a more entrepreneurial journey where you're going to build out these very important systems of your business. Why does this matter in a legal presentation? It matters because great lawyers are going to analyze globally and in a way that is custom to you. If you tell me you want to be a freelancer forever, I'm going to tell you then your legal need might look one way. If you tell me you're trying to build the systems to grow, I'm going to think through the problem set as a lawyer in a different kind of a way. So that's why you should be clear on your words, because you want to make sure that when you are purchasing legal services in whatever form that might be, you are sharing with that service provider information that is correct and accurate. So freelancer, entrepreneur, make sure that you know either way, whatever the classification, you are the master conductor of your business. And so it is essential that you know all the things that you need to know, at least that you know enough to hire the type of people who can help you. And so that's what we're here today to discuss with legal. The reminder being, no matter freelance or small business owner, you're the master conductor. And here's the additional caveat. There's no get out of jail free card for freelancers or small business owners or startups. I work a lot with startups. There just isn't. And so we want to sit with that, appreciate there is no get out of jail free card. What does that mean? That just puts the onus on you as the master conductor to be knowledgeable. I think that I am in good company because you wouldn't be sitting here with me during the lunch hour to talk about the law if you didn't already appreciate this fact. So you are the master conductor. You need to be aware of legal. It is not the case that you being a freelancer, you don't have to worry about it. So I've got my little slide here that makes me laugh, but I assure you, no robins were harmed in the making of this PowerPoint presentation. Okay, tip 3. The law plays an essential role in business and in your freelance work. They work together. They're hand in hand. There is no industry that you could share with me. I've done presentations like this live where you could say, Kristen, but the law doesn't apply in, my marketing business. It doesn't apply when all I'm doing is social media content creation. It doesn't apply when I'm just taking photos. I've not been stumped yet, but if you can think of one, feel free to try and throw it in the chat. Let's just make sure we're on the same page with the law plays an essential role in business and truly in life for us here in the US. So we've got to be aware of it. We can't hide from it. While it's the case that I think most mature entrepreneurs appreciate all these things, one good piece of pushback that I think is absolutely fair is, all right, Kristen, I agree with you. The law matters. I'm on board. I'm the master conductor. I'm bought in. But I don't know how lawyers can help me, how they can add value, what I can even direct them to do, because I don't have enough frame of knowledge to know what to even ask for. I think this is a great point and something that we're going to cover today. Hopefully by the end, you have a clear baseline on what types of things you would need and how to ask a lawyer for help with those things. First, let's start with making sure we're on the same page with what lawyers do. Lawyers help their clients think through and solve problems. In fairness, right now we're in the civil context. We're not in the criminal context. It's a very different playing field. In the business context, we help entrepreneurs, founders, freelancers protect what they're building. So, like every other industry, some folks in the legal industry are great. They're excellent. They love what they do. They're honest. They're, great human beings. And like every other industry, some are not. Ideally, when you find the legal advisor that's going to be, your choice, you should feel that you are in good hands with them and that you trust them. If you are not feeling that way, then you probably should keep looking for a better fit for you. In general, niching down now to talk about business lawyers, there's a lot that business lawyers can do. I've put here just on one slide as many different things that I can fit. Most areas that touch business include, contracts, intellectual property, employment law. Sometimes, depending on the style of your business, we might be looking at commercial real estate and property law if you're purchasing real property. You could find, legal counsel that just does insurance law and helps you understand, the different policies and what you need to know there. Maybe they specialize in suing insurance companies. Regulatory and compliance can oftentimes be its own niche in the law. For example, someone who specializes in knowing the rules from the SEC, Security and Exchange Commission. It's a very complex area of law. If you get to that place where you want to raise capital, you don't want to mess up. And because it's so complex, lawyers niche down in our industry because then they can be experts at what they do. And it becomes cheaper for the consumer to go to an expert who only focuses on one thing. This can be difficult, though, for a small business who doesn't have the money to afford, specialists necessarily in each one of these areas, and maybe doesn't even have that type of need for an expert in each area, but also doesn't have the funding to support hiring, in-house counsel or general counsel. That might not really be the state that your business is in. So there are firms like mine. The firm that I own is called Corp Law. We are a team of, I think we're 8 now and growing. And we specialize in working with small business owners and creatives, entrepreneurs, freelancers too, in serving as their outside general counsel. So our team is more a generalist practice so that we can be in a position to help our clients with both contracts and intellectual property. And quite frankly, our team can also help you with litigation if you're sued. That's a little bit unique in that the industry standard is for lawyers to specialize. Why is that important for you as a possible consumer of legal services to be aware of? It's important because you want to be an educated consumer. So perhaps the first thing you decide is important for your freelance business, the first most important thing is securing a trademark. So you hire a trademark attorney. Then you decide, you want to enter into some type of independent contractor agreement with one of your clientele. And you call the trademark attorney and you say, hey, can you review this contract for me? Aren't you my lawyer now? You just did all my trademarks or one trademark. The lawyer is, and if they're a specialist, they might tell you, no, I'm not able to review that contract. That's not what I do. Or, they might tell you, we need to enter into a new engagement in order for me to be able to review your contract because we were only working together on the one thing. So as consumers of legal services, it is important for you to know lawyers usually specialize. If you want a specialist, that's who you should look for. If you want a generalist, that's who you should look for. You got to make sure that you're asking the right questions. And in fairness to my profession, lawyers are not always great business people. They are tacticians. They are on production line. You tell us to produce, we produce. Our firm is a bit unique in that we take great pride in having quite a bit of business savvy. But in general, the lawyer you're speaking with might not explain it to you the same way that I have explained it to you. And so it is incumbent upon you as the master conductor to make sure that you are using your time correctly and that you don't spend your time, an hour speaking to a lawyer, which is usually not fun type of shopping for most people, who is a specialist who can't help you with the thing that you need help with because you set the meeting with the wrong attorney. So you really want to think through this as you think about who you might, what legal services you might be in need of. You definitely don't want to consider or tell yourself that you'll worry about legal and all of the ways that the law affects what you're doing at a later date. I'll worry about this some other time. You're really rolling the dice in that scenario. So don't be overwhelmed by the amount of information. Certainly don't sweep it under the rug. Tip 4, it's very important that as you are building your freelance empire, you build atop a custom foundation. I'm talking about entity formation. So if you don't set yourself up as an entity and register with the state, here I'm assuming the state for you will be Florida, but if you're not in Florida, you may register your business entity somewhere else. There are a lot of different elements that run into that analysis. If you don't register as an entity with the state, by default, you're considered a sole proprietorship. This is how you'll be considered, again, by default. You don't have to do anything. That's just how it's going to work unless you properly register an entity. So as you start thinking through which entity makes sense for you, understand that selection of an entity is a multifaceted analysis. As you are doing your Google research, understand there are multiple layers that go into determining which entity is right for you. And I'll tell you what those include, at least 3. There's the legal analysis, what needs to happen, thinking about things like the corporations code for your state in order to maintain the entity properly, in order to ensure you have the appropriate protections to secure your limited liability shield, which is one of the primary benefits of incorporating an entity. If someone were to sue you, to sue your business specifically, and they try to go after your personal assets, the limited liability shield that is kind of erected around you and the entity will serve to protect your personal assets if everything is done correctly. So one of the great benefits of registering your entity is that limited liability shield. But what other considerations are there include accounting analysis, and lawyers and accountants will usually each say, look, I'm not an accountant. You need to talk to your tax advisor about the implications of an LLC versus a C Corp, about an S Corp election. Lawyers and accountants each have their own responsibilities, obligations, and most lawyers, unless they're, tax lawyers, and not even then, are going to feel that it's appropriate for them to give you tax advice. That's just not their expertise. So usually a more sophisticated entrepreneur will roll in an accountant to the conversation and run a tax analysis on potential exposure for different entity types. In general, when we're dealing with freelancers, you see the LLC selected as the structure. That is limited liability company, not limited liability corporation, because the LLC is considered the easiest to maintain. It doesn't require a lot of, red tape like resolutions and different maintenance that might be required for the more formal C Corp, but it does still require some maintenance. And so you want to think through the multifaceted analysis as you decide what entity is right for your freelance enterprise or for your small business. as it grows. And you should also understand that it's a continuing analysis. So what might be right for you today doesn't necessarily mean it'll be right for you if you grow from, a freelance enterprise of one, and maybe you register as an LLC, to, a more established small business of 10 to 15. Maybe something needs to change at that point based on your operations. So you want to roll all that in as you decide what makes sense to you. But one way or the other, you should probably register an entity so you get that benefit of the limited liability shield and you're insulating your personal assets. I think I covered most of the things on this slide, but to the extent I skipped over this, when I talk about entity registration, note that, entities are vehicles of state statutory construction. So that just means that there are actual rules out there, right? If we look at the Florida Corporations Code specifically, where we can see the nuances and what is allowable in our state as an entity. And it is true that each state allows different entity types to be registered. But speaking generally, most common that we see are your sole proprietorship by default, a partnership, 2 or more folks come together, each bearing sort of an unlimited personal liability unless it's a partnership, limited liability company, LLC, or a C Corp. And then you will often hear about this S Corp, which is also a tax election that you would make through the IRS. Whether or not that makes sense for you, something you will want to talk about with your tax advisor. In general, the process for selecting your entity would be to start with an understanding of your larger goals and then strategically select the state that you want to incorporate in. Most people will select the state where they're operating, but not always. And then you would strategically select your entity type based off of the things that I just shared with you, based on the advice you receive from counsel, from your tax advisors, and based on what makes sense for you, for your own internal operations. You're going to be the one managing this unless you're delegating it to someone else. You'll prepare the necessary documents. So your governing documents, you have that ready to go. Who's your registered agent? Things like this. And then you'll register the entity. In Florida, they make it very easy to do online. For folks who are, budget conscious, we don't see, as long as you do the research and you think about this, don't see any issue with you doing this yourself. Log in, submit your registration on Florida SunBiz, and then, they usually will process the registration fairly quickly, and you're good to go. But remember that this is a continuing process. Once you register the entity, then you have to maintain it. And this does require some knowledge of the rules in the state. And there is, of course, your annual filing fee. You don't want to be late on that because the fees can be, $400 or so. And then you want to maintain that continued awareness of, does this entity type still make sense for me in my business? So that is a fair summation, I think, of tip 4, which is to build your freelance enterprise atop a proper and custom foundation. Tip 5 is to understand intellectual property enough to protect your assets. You don't have to become an IP expert, but a lot of the freelancers that we've come to work with are doing work that touches very closely, that has significant IP implications. To that end, you have to understand what that means for you. At a very baseline, I want you to remember the creator of a thing owns the thing. This is very much a simplification of IP law, which, is like a semester-long course in law school and can be much longer than that. But for you, if you don't have much experience with IP, the creator of the thing owns the thing. If you are a painter and you paint, a beautiful piece of artwork. You are the creator of that artwork. You own that artwork. You can choose to sell it through a contract. You can choose to do a lot of things with it. But at the baseline, creator of the thing owns the thing. Just let it sit with you. Make sure that you can appreciate this general concept, which will help you in figuring out the IP help you need and what to do with your creations or someone else's creations. So we want to make sure that with a baseline knowledge of IP, you're protecting your creations. You can do this through intellectual property protections that exist. For example, a popular one is trademark. You can secure a trademark through the United States Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO. There is a process for it. It is recommended and in some instances required to work with a lawyer to do this. It is a process that is deceptively simple. We filed plenty of trademarks and I've worked with plenty of clients who have tried to take a DIY effort to securing a trademark. I'll say that it's just a process that's deceptively simple. There's a lot that you need to know in order to select the appropriate classifications, and even doing a search of which trademarks are active and live. There's a lot of nuance that goes into it. But if you think that, you got enough information and you want to make the DIY attempt, perhaps that's something that you consider. The type of thing that you would trademark, right, is for example, a logo or a catchphrase. The Nike swoosh, the M&M. Well, yeah, M&M's work as well. Or the McDonald's golden arches. Things like this. These are recognizable marks that we all, have come to know and companies that have expended a substantial amount of resources in building a brand that's recognizable and that should be protected. A copyright is also a type of IP protection that you should be aware of. Usually, simplifying, again here, we will see copyright protection in something like a book. Right? If you have a book that you want to get copyrighted so that it's not, copied word for word, and you've got that appropriate protection there saying this is my, original creative work. This isn't the type of thing that you would submit to be trademarked. It's just a different type of protection. So you want to make sure you have a sense of, I'm the creator of the thing. I wrote the book, but now where do I go to protect it? What is appropriate? And how do we get that sort of figured out? We're talking about securing a patent, which is also a type of IP. We're thinking more of, an invention, a specific type of process, unique algorithm that we want to ensure is protected. And these are all just different types of IP protection that you might secure for yourself. You should be aware of this both in a personal standpoint. Maybe you've created some of these protectable works, protected types of works, and you should protect them. But to the extent that you are using these types of protected works, for example, let's say you are a social media manager and you are taking photos to utilize to create, unique and interesting social media content for your clientele. We have this happen, unfortunately, a lot. To the extent that you use there's a whole industry around, folks trolling the internet to find the unlicensed use. And then because the penalties under federal law for copyright infringement are strict, which means if you messed up, there's really not a lot of defense that you can claim. You have to pay. So there are folks who send these letters telling you, we noticed that you've used an unlicensed work. Now you have to take it down. And not only that, you need to pay us. One of our clients this week just got one of those messages to the tune of $30,000 is what they're asking for. And our client is a creative design agency who was working with freelancers and independent contractors and one of the independent contractors utilized the photo. So it got lost in the shuffle. The internal policy is that all the photos are protected, and now it's become quite a significant exposure. $30,000 is a lot for them as a small business. And so it's just, IP is one of those things. You want to make sure you understand and you have that baseline knowledge so that you can follow those rules and avoid being in the situation, the situation that I mentioned. Really, all parties could have played a better role at understanding, as the contractor, as the freelancer. If you are aware of these rules, then you are less likely to violate them. As the business owner for the creative agency, you want to be aware of these rules so that you can appropriately supervise those freelancers and team members that you bring onto your team so that they're not violating these rules. So there's a lot that rolls into IP. I can do an entire presentation on, copyright alone. But in general, I want the takeaway to be that you should ensure you own the things that you think you own, right? Photos, websites, whatever it is. And then secondly, that you are aware that the creator of the thing owns the thing unless they've given you permission to use it, or, you've given out permission to use it. How important is it to protect your IP? We get this question a lot. For example, we get the question, look, I want to register my logo. I would like to secure a trademark. My name, my logo, my brand that I've been building is important to me, but I don't have the money to do it right now. So the question becomes, should my company do this immediately? Or is it okay if we budget this for, Q4 or Q1 of next year as the company makes money? And our response is going to be an analysis of how important is the IP to you and to your company. If your name is not a big deal, and for some companies it's not, they don't care if they're operating under their last name or something else. They've not spent a lot of money in, building up the brand. They could operate perhaps under any name. Well, then, perhaps securing a trademark for that name is not a big deal for you at this time, and you can kick that ball as far down the road as you like. But if you have spent, a significant amount of money into building this unique brand and this logo, and you're blasting it everywhere, and it would really upset you if you see someone else do the same thing and they're first to the table to get the IP protection they need to kind of beat you out in the process. And it doesn't 100% work that way, but I'm simplifying here. If it's that important to you, then yes, you should invest in that protection for your business proportionately to the amount that you're investing in the IP itself. So that's how you should think through what makes sense for your budget and what you should kind of pour into expending some funds on protecting your IP. To that end, I make tip 6. Tip 6 makes my list because of how often we see it. So tip 6 is a byproduct of tip 5, which is understand IP generally. Tip 6 is know whether or not your business name is trademarkable. It's a very sad story that, again, we hear over and over, which is where, a freelancer or a company starts building around a name. They start building a brand that they really enjoy. Then they get one of these cease and desist notices, and they find out that someone else beat them to the punch. They're using someone else's name, and now they're being asked to stop. And usually the frustration of the individual in that scenario or the company in that scenario isn't so much that they're being asked to stop. It's more that they have now take this pride in what they've built. They want to continue building it, and they essentially have to start from scratch. So we usually don't see any litigation there. It's like, all right, I messed up, I'm going to stop. But we certainly see a lot of internal frustration that the company or the individual didn't do the appropriate research to make sure that they could use their, the name or the logo that's their dream name or logo that they decided to use. So make sure that you do all you can to make sure your business name is trademarkable. Here are things, practical tips to help you do that. Of course, run a Google search. Look for companies with the same or similar name, or if it's a logo, a mark, image that you're trying to use to be associated with your company name. And not only the same name, but is it a similar type of trade or industry such that it would cause confusion? So if you're, I'm on social media marketing today as my example area. If you're a social media marketing freelancer and you want to use the name, Fancy Flowers, don't use that. It's not good. And then you find that there is a social media marketing agency in, California using the name Fancy Flower, not plural. It's doing the same type of a thing you would be doing. It's got almost an identical name. If it's already trademarked, you're going to have a real tough time securing your trademark for Fancy Flowers in this example. So don't ignore Google. It's free. Search it out. You should also search other social media platforms to see if folks are using the handle that you would want to use for your company. We've actually had a couple of folks hire us just to help them try to secure a particular handle that somebody else is using on their registered trademark. So you want to look for that as well. And then you can visit the USPTO website, and they have a free search engine on their website. Again, it's deceptively simple. So my search on the website might be very different than your search. Nonetheless, it's a free tool. You should use it and take a look to see if the name you want to use is already being used actively by someone else in a similar industry. And then another thing that you can do is search the State Department where you want to or where you have already incorporated. So go on Florida Sunbiz in Florida and then do a run through to see if anyone else is using a similar name to what you want to use. And if the answer is yes in any of those scenarios, then maybe consider trying something different. All right, so the IP takeaways are: creator of the thing owns the thing unless it's transferred. I know I've said it a lot, but hopefully it's sunk in for you. And, in general, your IP is an asset. Traditionally, real property and, tangible things, the law that is associated with them, I think, is more intuitive for us as consumers. This is my pen. If you grab it and you use it, you're stealing it from me. And this makes sense, I think, to consumers logically. But when you add the digital layer that comes along with intellectual property, I find that folks kind of get a little confused. I found this photo on Pinterest and I copied it. So of course I can use it. It was out there for the rest of the world to see. Unfortunately, that's not really the way that IP works, and it's not going to be the copyright analysis that a court is going to apply for you. And that kicks us back to one of my first tips, which is there's no get out of jail free card for freelancers. There's no court that I know of that's going to be okay with you saying, look, judge, I violated copyright law, but I'm a freelancer, so can you give me a break? Unfortunately, it just doesn't work like that. So make sure we're wrapping our heads around IP law. Tip 7, put it in writing and demand quality custom contracts. If you have a friend that already has a contract and they do something similar to what you do, copying their contract is not custom to you. When done correctly, contracts are customized to your business operations, to your goals, to the systems that make sense for you. If you're a freelancer, you really should have a basic sales contract. If you're a freelancer producing work that is IP protected, your contract should consider who owns the right to the IP. When you sell it to someone else, Have you then transferred that ownership right to them? Is that what they expect as your consumer? Or are you retaining it? That's really a conversation you would have with legal counsel who is great at contracts, because it really is a skill set. And they'd talk about that with you. They'd flush it out. They'd get a sense of what are your goals and does it make sense in the sales conversation that you're having with your consumers. Here in that example that I gave earlier with our freelancer and the creative agency, and we weren't representing them at this point. They had no independent contractor agreements. So now that there is a dispute, we can't look to anywhere to see who was responsible, and everybody's pointing the finger. Agency says it's the freelancer's fault. Consumer of agency says it's the agency's fault. The actual photographer doesn't care whose fault it is, but they feel upset because those are their amazing photographs and they were, used without the photographer's permission. Contracts step in to adjust and lend specifics around default rules. So default IP rule is the creator of the thing owns the thing. Via contract, you can give that right to someone else in exchange for, money or something else. So contracts are an essential piece of business. For a freelancer, an essential contract you should have is a sales contract. If you're working with independent contractors as a freelancer or small business, those independent contractor agreements are very important. So you want to ensure that your contracts are valid. For lawyers, that means something different than for non-lawyers. For lawyers, a valid contract has lawyer elements, offer, acceptance, consideration. That's how the court would look at the contract to determine if it's valid. Most clients don't know how to determine if a contract is legally valid when they do this DIY attempt to poach a contract off of the internet, off of Google, change some words and I'm done. No, probably not. You probably don't understand the significance of those words in a legal way because you've never taken a class called contract law and you've never litigated contracts. And at that point, they become the most essential element of a dispute. So I view contracts as the shield to protect you and your business or you and your freelance empire. They are so important that I absolutely do not recommend a do-it-yourself effort on your contracts. It's not a good way to go because it's going to be the first place that a court of law looks or that the parties look when a dispute arises. And then you're in it for all the marbles. So your contracts are so important, you really don't want to risk messing them up by doing them yourself. And that has nothing to do with you not being a great writer or being very smart, or even, as we've had clients say, oh, I've looked at a lot of contracts. Unless you can talk to me about contract theory under the law, and unless you can tell me how many breach of contract disputes you've litigated, I'm really not going to recommend that you take the risk of DIY efforts with contracts. So what about those places that sell contract templates? I really don't like them. Understand that lawyers, legal teams usually have their own templates, and they're not usually charging you for the templates. You're going to find out what you need. They're going to pull the appropriate template that's approved by the firm and that the team likes and has vetted, and then they're going to customize the template based off of what you need. And if you're really at the, top-notch levels and a mature entrepreneur, you are going to walk through the contract with your lawyer and have them explain to you what each of the provisions mean. So that way you will know as your business evolves how to adjust the contract. So it is essential for you as a freelancer, as a small business owner, to think of contracts as very essential pieces of what you're doing. Whether that's you signing somebody else's contracts or you creating, your own with the advice of counsel. And to remember, contracts are living documents. So if you hire a lawyer and they make you an awesome contract and then 10 years go by, the law changes, your business changes, your contracts need to change too. So contracts are living documents. You want to continue updating them. I know I only had to 1250. I wasn't sure how many tips that I was going to get through. I think this is a lot of content. So I will see if our organizer wants to.
How about 5 more minutes? I'd love to get through them. You're covering some great content. So.
Okay, I will keep talking then. I will skip this. I will give you a list of agreements I think that you should have. I think a freelancer should absolutely have a kind of standardized sales agreement. So somebody is hiring you to produce whatever it is that you produce, whatever it is you're an expert at. Now they're ready to sign on the dotted line. We need an agreement. So ideally, you have your own contract and you do not rely on theirs. Understand that when you hire a lawyer, the lawyer's ethical responsibility and obligation under the bar rules is to produce a document that is best for you. We zealously, that is the word, advocate for you. So our contracts are probably going to be one-sided to protect our client, unless there's a negotiation or unless our client says, whoa, that's going to scare away, the other person at the table. I want you to, dial down that language. But really, your lawyer is your hired gun there to create a super shield for you. If you're using somebody else's lawyer, of course, that is risky because they created the contracts in that example for that person, not for you. In fact, it's probably going to be one-sided to that person and not to you. So a great place that, having a good business lawyer in your corner can also be reviewing contracts that you are asked to sign. So you want to have a sales agreement. You want to also consider, to the extent you're working with others or to the extent you're asked to sign them, independent contractor agreements. I can tell you with this example I gave earlier, the creative agency that is coming to us now in this litigation context, we're going to advise them that they need independent contractors right away. And we will likely write in our independent contractor agreement that it is the freelancer or independent contractor's job to ensure that they are using, material that has been appropriately vetted and that they will be financially responsible if they mess it up. Why would we put that? Well, because we represent the agency. We are protecting them from liability. So you want to think through those things to the extent that, we were representing a freelancer who was asked to sign a very one-sided independent contractor agreement. We would advise them and we'd say, whoa, you're accepting a lot of risk here. If you get this wrong, we could help you see that. So to the extent as a freelancer, you're asked to sign one of these, you want to read it really carefully. To the extent that you want to create one for yourself that you could share with others that you're working with, that would be the probably good way to go because a lot of folks don't have them. And because the independent contractor agreement would be one-sided, to you, or would just be not necessarily one-sided, but more favorable to you and to your interests. You also want to think through assignment provisions, so assigning IP to others, whether that be a standalone type of work for hire assignment agreement or a specific provision in your sales agreement or in your independent contractor agreement. There are others here. I think terms and conditions are a really important thing to have on your website. But in general, the main ones you want to be thinking about if you're strictly freelancer are that sales agreement and the independent contractor agreement. Kevin, am I good to continue or should I stop?
I would say go ahead and cover tip 8. And then I got just a couple of questions that folks have put through that I'd like to get answered before we close out.
Absolutely. Happy to. Okay. Tip 8, don't overestimate your relationships. It feeds into tip 7 and to my points about the contracts. In my world, it is not offensive to ask somebody else to sign a contract. In fact, it's a show of respect. I respect you enough to give you all the details, all the terms up front. Here's what we're going to do if something doesn't go right. Here's what you're going to pay. Here's this, here's that. It's so clear. I put it in writing. I feel good about that. But of course, I'm biased. In general, what we see with the small business owners, with freelancers, with folks who are desperate to get work or just excited to get going is this overestimation of the relationship. Oh, that's my friend. They won't ever sue me for providing bad, unlicensed photos. They won't ever take me to court. They won't ever XYZ. We'll never have a dispute. You're really rolling the dice with that kind of thinking. And my goal here is not to make you negative, and is not to have you thinking that you can't trust anyone. That's not true. But in business, right, disputes happen. Let's just normalize that. People disagree. And in business, when money is exchanging hands, the disagreements feel more powerful. They feel more weighty. So because we're normalizing and we're expecting disputes to arise, we want to make sure we don't overestimate our relationship with folks and assume that a dispute will never arise. And when you think that way, you're going to ensure that certain formalities are there, contracts are there, that you know what you're signing to the extent that you're going to be obligated to abide by that if there is a dispute. And to ensure that you build this thought process of, well, what would happen? We've not covered any of this yet. If there is a dispute, what's the difference between arbitration and mediation? And, which court would we be in? The more knowledge you have around these things, the better prepared you can be to create business relationships that are less likely to fail. So tip 8 is don't overestimate your relationships. I'm happy to answer questions.
Wow, that's great stuff, Kristen, and this is really good. And I think you've actually added a few nuggets from what you presented last year, which is great. And I think, well, and that's good though, because I know a lot of that's based on questions that come up that we may not think are out there, but that came up last year. So I appreciate you incorporating those. Let me just pop this question in there. I'm a graphic designer. I tend to include a copyright designation on much of my work. Is that correct? Versus a trademark? Is that a question you can generally answer?
If we're talking about graphic design, we're probably going to be in the universe of copyright, not so much trademark. But I'd want to have a conversation around how are you checking on whether or not, let's say you're using images, that they're licensed or unlicensed. What's your process? What do your agreements say? If you're telling me you're a graphic designer, my assumption is someone is hiring you to produce work. Is there a contract? If there is not a contract, then you put yourself at risk of your disclaimer not being powerful enough. Disclaimers are great, but they're like a lower shelf protection. It's not like top shelf protection. Top shelf is contracts. Top shelf is, ensuring everything is appropriately licensed. So disclaimers, good that you're thinking about disclaimers. Awesome. I like that. But I would ask who has vetted your disclaimers to make sure, that they would hold up in court if at all. And then what is happening in terms of the contractual relationship between you and whoever you're producing work for.
Great. It sounds like maybe more conversation needed on that one. Again, one of those things that there's a lot more specifics to it. But you do see a lot of folks who put stuff out there and there's a little C by it. And I always wonder, well, is that really copyright, or what does that really mean from a legal standpoint? Here's the good thing. I had about 8 other comments or questions come through, and you answered all of them in your presentation. So I don't know if everybody had an advanced copy of your presentation, but that's always a good thing when a presenter answers most of the questions ahead of time. So that's why I didn't pop them up there. So those of you who put those comments in the box, that's why, because your questions were specifically answered as we went through. So here's just a bit more information as we close out here on Corp Law. So their website, their phone number, their slogan, their motto. They also are offering what you see on your screen there, a free 45-minute discovery consultation with their team, where they will get to know you a little bit more about your business and help you think through how to ensure that it's protected. If you registered for this session, you will get that automatically. So that is a lot of value, folks, just to get that in addition to what you've heard today. So Kristen, thank you again so much for all of your time and your expertise and your willingness to share it with us. And we hope to have you again back with us next year at Freelance Business Week 2022. So thanks again. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Kevin. Thanks so much. This was great.
All right, folks, we're right at the hour. So we've got about 14 minutes until our next presentation that we have coming up. I am really looking forward to this one. It is a dear friend of mine. She's actually my co-host for Freelance Business Week, Tampa, Kansas City for today. Julie Cortez, How to Rock Your Freelance Biz. So she's coming up in just a few moments, is probably patiently waiting with her speaker off studio to get them all set up. Let me just put one more website up there. This is brand new. Literally, one of the things that came out of our discussion yesterday is the need for folks to be able to get together, mobilize, network, about addressing the rights and the concerns of the freelance community, which is a growing community. It's approaching 50% of the workforce. So check out this website. It's brand new, not a lot up there yet, except to sign up and keep you informed. Legionsoffreelancers.org, legionsoffreelancers.org, and the /who's in, you can sign right up there. So thanks very much for your time today. Thank you for your patience, Julie, waiting in studio. We'll catch you a little bit later. Bye now.